Let's begin in South Africa, where Nelson Mandela remains in hospital in Pretoria with a serious lung infection. Well, earlier, the South African presidency issued a statement in which it described Mandela's condition as having improved overnight and was still critical but stable. President Jacob Zuma also spoke out about his decision to cancel a trip to Mozambique, which had many South Africans fearing the worst for Madiba's health. Zuma said, quote, "I cancelled my visit to Mozambique today so that I could see him and confer with the doctors. He's much better today than he was when I saw him last night," end quote. President Jacob Zuma's latest statement surprised many who had been bracing for the worst, and it came after some chaotic scenes outside the hospital. More now from CCTV's Guy Henderson.
Please, can we just give the families some dignity, press, guys? Come on.
Braving the crowds, but the family's appearance was brief outside the hospital, collecting cards, but also quite unexpectedly changing the tone. Mr. Mandela is now stable, said one daughter, another that there was still hope.
There is a lot of comfort that's coming out from the messages, be it people that send us personal messages through our phones, and the messages that we get that you guys capture, and the messages that are here. They've given us strength to carry on and to give him positive energy that he can come out of it. Yeah.
The president's spokesman, Mac Maharaj, echoes the same line, still critical, but much better. Meanwhile, the number of well-wishers continues to swell. Despite improvements, South Africans know Mandela remains very ill and very old. Thursday, one of Nelson Mandela's daughters said that anything could be imminent to a local radio station here. In the meantime, more and more people are turning up to pay tribute to a man who changed the course of history in South Africa and say their thanks before time runs out. 19 days in, the nation continues to hold its breath. Guy Henderson, CCTV, Pretoria.
Let's now cross live to Pretoria. CCTV's Guy Henderson joins us from there. Guy, what's the latest where you are?
Well, they call Mr. Mandela, Nelson Mandela, a fighter, mostly because of his time when he was in his 20s, back in the 1950s as a boxer. But he is very much living up to that reputation. He continues, by the sounds of it, to fight in the hospital behind me. We got an inkling this morning that there might be some good news on the way from the family this morning. On Thursday morning, they made their way out of the gates of the hospital behind me in front of crowds of well-wishers and many journalists. They gave short interviews during that, in which, as you heard, they said that Mr. Mandela was now stable, and they referred to the fact that those well-wishers had made a big difference. Then later in the afternoon, we heard from the presidency an official statement saying that very cautiously Mr. Mandela's condition remained critical, but that he was much better. Safe to say that that has come as a big surprise here.
Guy, let's talk a little bit about that statement from President Zuma and of course him explaining his decision to cancel a trip to Mozambique. Has that assuaged South Africans' fears at all? I mean, what's the general mood there like?
Yes, well, when President Zuma announced that he was going to cancel this trip to Mozambique, I think everyone really feared the worst at that point. They felt that he was probably not going to go there because it was possible that Mr. Mandela was not going to make it, and that it might even be hours rather than days. Well, from this president's statement, it now looks as though the reason he stayed is because the doctors wanted to speak to him. The doctors actually had some good news. The reaction here has been cautiously optimistic, I think. And this afternoon, since I filed that report, we've actually had busloads of people being shipped in from different parts of the country, different parts of Gauteng province, and they're now singing and dancing and continuing to pay their respects and say thank you to Nelson Mandela for the great achievements, for the many things that he has done for the people of South Africa. Certainly cautious optimism, and possibly very few people in the world, if nobody else, who had enjoyed quite this much support.
All right, Guy, thanks very much for those updates. That's CCTV's Guy Henderson live in Pretoria. Now, close family friend Bantu Holomisa says he's battling to come to terms with Mandela's illness. He says losing Mandela would be like losing his own father.
No, anybody who talks about Mandela, people can become emotional. There would be those who say, let him go. There would be those who say, why are you saying this? This is not our culture, and so on. But everything must be left entirely into the hands of God.
How are you dealing with the fact that Nelson Mandela may be slipping away right now?
The loss of Madiba would mean to me that he has left a big hole in my heart. And I will obviously say to you, it would be like losing your own father. And because the relationship we had was that of a father and son.
One community in Cape Town is holding its own special vigil. Mandela Park is home to some of the city's poorest people, but they are convinced Mandela has enriched their lives. CCTV's Travis Andrews has more.
19 days into the hospitalization of Nelson Mandela, and the crisis around his health has swept up this community. The township took his name and he's walked through these streets, and they feel he is one of their own.
Mandela means a lot. It's our icon. It's our tata, because he have walked here. He have walked also in these steps. That's why we also pray for him today. He have went to Moravian school. He have been with us. So Tata is one of the good people that we take as our icon here in Mandela Park.
The people here are finding it as difficult as everyone else to keep pace with Mandela's condition, to sift the truth from the rumors. And as in all our times here, they put in their faith in prayer.
People are not preparing for the inevitable, but people are asking for the will of God, whatever it may be. If His will is that he lives, then we sow the seed of faith. But if God's will is that Madiba passes on and moves on to the better world, then that is also acceptable and it is okay with the people.
Like many communities around South Africa, poverty is a daily reality, but so is the unflinching belief of those who live here that Mandela Park embodies his legacy of giving and sharing and looking out for others. The song and prayers continue here, they just don't want to let go. But many people here have accepted that Nelson Mandela's time could be drawing to a close. Travis Andrews, CCTV, Cape Town.
You're watching Africa Live. Let's take our first break this hour coming up. Seeking closer ties, Obama begins Africa Charm offensive in Senegal.
We follow the latest trends in global politics, economics, culture and sport, and how Africa fits into the global picture. You decide what's important.
We need to trade justice. Africa's future will be determined by Africa.
For women's equal opportunity, for a better life.
We have to change something, and it's not the outsiders.
Talk Africa, a new voice for the world.
Welcome back to Africa Live. And for more analysis on our top story that's on the health of Nelson Mandela, let's now cross over live to CCTV's Famida Mila. She's in Johannesburg. Famida.
Thanks, Penina. Well, just to recap, former South African President Nelson Mandela is spending a 20th day in hospital. Earlier in the day, the presidency had issued a statement saying that his condition had in fact improved. While he remains critical, he is now stable. Well, we're joined in studio now by Chirimu Hengari. He's from the South African Institute of International Affairs. Welcome to Africa Live. Now, Mr. Hengari, looking at the day's developments, how well do you think the South African presidency is handling the flow of information regarding Mr. Mandela's condition?
Yeah, I don't think that we can even talk about management of information here. I would rather talk about mismanagement of information, because there's been way too many people communicating about the state of former President Nelson Mandela's health. The presidency has been communicating, the family has been communicating. At the end of the day, we have a cacophony and a Tower of Babel, really. So I think there's a need for a much better structured way of communicating the state of President Nelson Mandela's health.
One of the areas that appears to be concerning is developments over the last 24 hours. Late Wednesday evening, we had President Zuma visit Mr. Mandela, and shortly after that issuing a statement saying he would cancel a planned trip to Mozambique for a SADC summit. And then early on Thursday, we also had family being summoned to the hospital, Mr. Zuma arriving in a presidential convoy, and of course later in the day, as we mentioned, that statement coming out that Mr. Mandela had improved. Do you think that the government and possibly the ruling political party, the ANC, is contributing to some of the chaos and the media and public frenzy around what's happening?
Yes, certainly. I think there has been a lot of speculation, and I think that comes out. It's a result of the manner in which government has been communicating. It has not been consistent. It has been quite contradictory as well. At the same time, former President Nelson Mandela's health is regarded as critical, but then stable. I don't know what that all means in terms of the type of message that government would like to communicate. So I think there is a serious challenge in terms of communicating with the public.
Now, today we've also had Mr. Mandela's daughter, Makiziwe, lash out at the media, specifically international media, saying, and even calling them racist, saying that they had no respect for African culture. Do you think that type of criticism is warranted?
I don't think it's really warranted, because I think the media would deal with the information that they have at hand. And if the information is not well packaged, it leaves the door open for speculation, and that has been the case really over the past 2 to 3 weeks. The government has not been communicating effectively. It has not been feeding the media with information in a timely fashion, and that opens the door for a lot of speculation, a lot of innuendo, and a lot of rumor mongering, if I may add.
All right, and one of the other issues that we're looking at is President Barack Obama, the U.S. president, is due to arrive in South Africa on Friday after he leaves Senegal on his Africa tour. Is this possibly causing tension and a lot of pressure for the government in terms of how to handle everything that's going on?
Yeah, I think I would assume that it appears to be too much for government. The South African government has not had a similar case before. So there's been a lot of the government has been improvising quite a lot, in my view. So President Obama's visit is also adding to the problem, because my view is that government does not seem to know how to manage these two big events, so to speak.
And what are we looking at in terms of expectations with regard to Obama's visit to South Africa? There was talk about him seeing Nelson Mandela, but surely that is out of the question at this point.
Well, I think I think the American government will try to normalize this visit as much as possible, to focus on the issues at hand that ought to be discussed, mostly focusing on trade and investment in Africa, as well as investment from Africa to the United States. So I think they will try to normalize it, but I think the conditions would not allow for a very normal state visit.
All right, we'll leave it there for now. Thank you very much for speaking there to Chirimu Hengari from the South African Institute of International Affairs. All right, back to you in Nairobi, Penina.
Thank you very much, Famida. The CCTV's Famida Miller live in Johannesburg. And let's pick up from where Famida left on Obama's visit to the continent. He is in the Senegalese capital, Dakar, as a start to his Africa tour. Obama held talks with the Senegalese President Macky Sall, with whom he later addressed a joint press conference. Well, talks between the two leaders focused on enhanced cooperation and strengthening democracy. This was overshadowed by an apparent disagreement between the two over Obama's call for African governments to end discrimination against homosexuals. Macky Sall said that while Senegal was a very tolerant country, it was not ready to decriminalize homosexuality. Homosexual acts are still a crime in 38 African countries, where most people hold conservative religious views. The U.S. president hailed Africa for making amazing strides in achieving democracy. This is Obama's third visit to Africa since he became president in 2008. He's also due to travel to South Africa and Tanzania. Meanwhile, President Obama wants to emphasize on trade and investment during his Africa tour. He will also be focusing on democratic and institutional development and the next generation of African leaders. CCTV's Daniel Branches assesses whether his trip will overcome the disappointment felt during his first term in office.
As the son of a Kenyan father, expectations for President Obama's Africa agenda were set high during his 2009 trip to Ghana. But he's actually devoted less than 24 hours on the continent, and some analysts say the Obama administration has devoted a disproportionate weight of resources on the US Africa Command.
Beyond the historic significance of a son of Africa being in the White House, there has not been much substantive change. So what you have seen is an intensification of the U.S. military presence in Africa, particularly in resource-rich areas. And what you have seen is an overly intensified focus on security, a very narrow definition of security, this quest for terrorists, wherever they may lie, often at the expense of human security, of human needs and human development on the continent.
The White House says it's not going to fall behind on trade and investment, recognizing that countries like China, Brazil and Turkey have been getting in the game in Africa, in their words. But some think the Obama team has missed an opportunity to endorse trans-governmental action.
The setting of standards needs to be done by Africans themselves, not by Americans, not by Chinese, not by Europeans. And I would urge them to do so. It's one of my disappointments that the President is not, therefore, meeting with the Africa Union, with the UN Economic Commission on Africa, with the African Development Bank, and the continental bodies that manage these kinds of issues on a broader level.
Among the iconic images that the White House will be hoping that TV networks will beam back to US audiences is a visit to Robben Island, where Nelson Mandela spent 18 of his 27 years of incarceration. So beyond the personal politics of President Obama in Africa, there is a notable shift away from development based on aid towards deeper trade ties in order to compete in the new land of opportunity. Daniel Wrenches, CCTV, Washington.
Let's take another break here on Africa Live coming up. Seeking solutions, West and Central Africa leaders deliberate on how to tame piracy in the Gulf of Guinea. The Gulf of Guinea Maritime Security Summit has concluded in Cameroon's capital, Yaoundé. African leaders from ECOWAS, ECAS, and the Commission of the Gulf of Guinea attended. Maritime security in the Gulf of Guinea is causing increased concern among the international community, prompting leaders to focus on piracy, armed robbery, and upping maritime security in the area.
Piracy along the west coast of the Gulf of Guinea has become increasingly rampant. According to the International Maritime Bureau, 966 ships were attacked in West Africa last year. That's more than along the notorious Somali coast in the Gulf of Aden, which saw 851 attacks during the same period. The increasing number of pirate attacks are a threat to the economies of several West African countries, as well as regional peace and security. The worst affected sectors are fishing, shipping and oil exploration. The price of imported food and other commodities in the countries affected is also shooting up. The IMB has warned that the number of piracy attacks in the region has now exceeded those along the Somali coast. If the Gulf of Guinea can't curb piracy, it could become the second Gulf of Aden.
We are facing a huge challenge, but we can take measures to avoid the escalation of piracy. We can discuss how to solve the problem during the summit, mobilize all the resources that we can, and fight rampant piracy. I believe, with all our efforts, the Gulf of Guinea will be restored to a safe and prosperous region.
Maritime attacks in the Gulf of Guinea used to spill over into Nigeria's Niger River Delta, but have gradually expanded to neighbouring countries. On March 12, 2010, 2 fishing vessels belonging to the Dalian North Sea Fishing Company were attacked near the Bakassi Peninsula of Cameroon, with 7 Chinese citizens kidnapped. Now it's thought multinational cooperation and substantial experience with fighting piracy in the Gulf of Aden could be key to solving the security crisis in the Gulf of Guinea.
The security situation in the Gulf of Guinea is increasing. And I think that meetings like this, when we look into solutions and implement them, they'll go a long way.
The number of piracy attacks in the Gulf of Aden has come down because some European countries offered support to help fight piracy. I think the number of pirates attacked in the Gulf of Guinea will decline because it's in those same countries' interest to offer similar help to improve the security situation here.
Since 2010, the International Maritime Organization has listed the West African coast as one of the world's 6 pirate hotspots. Time is of the essence for the Gulf of Guinea countries to find a solution to their maritime security crisis, if they're to avoid it generating wider regional instability. Clementine Logan, CCTV.
Chronic malnutrition in children is a major problem for Africa. According to the United Nations Children's Agency, UNICEF, chronic malnutrition costs $25 million annually. Ethiopia has now launched a 2.5-year program to help boost key nutrition interventions. CCTV's Carol Oyola with the details.
Children in conflict-ridden nations in Africa suffer the most from chronic malnutrition. According to the World Health Organization, there has been an increase in stunting among the poorest urban population in Africa from 35 to 37%.
Well, almost every country in Africa today has rates of severe acute malnutrition. The question is how high it goes. So today, for example, the highest prevalence rates of severe acute malnutrition would be in countries such as Mali, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Sudan, Somalia particularly, for example. So many of the countries, interestingly, that are bordering Ethiopia would be some of the worst countries on the continent at the moment for severe acute malnutrition.
Sub-Saharan Africa has some of the world's highest rates of chronic malnutrition among children. The United Nations Children's Agency, UNICEF, estimates that chronic child malnutrition costs African countries a staggering $25 billion a year in loss of productivity and health costs that otherwise might have been avoided. It is these numbers that called for a meeting in Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa. A 2.5-year national nutrition program was launched at the summit. The plan hopes to reduce stunting statistics from 44 to 30%. However, there are mixed opinions on the progress of reducing stunting in the continent.
African countries still have a very substantial problem with undernutrition. There are many stunted children in the world, and in fact the prevalence of stunting is almost the highest in most of the African countries, along with South Asia. And the rate of improvement, the rate of reduction in stunting is actually slowest in sub-Saharan Africa.
The 240 million people in Africa are chronically undernourished. What it means? It means that the food they are having is not containing enough energy to meet their needs. I think this is important. But if you want you are interested in the number of malnourished people, this is really very difficult to estimate. But we know that roughly about 30%, from 30 to 40% of children under 5 years are malnourished.
African and international leaders, as well as key stakeholders in the food security sector, will meet at the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa from 30th June. They will discuss renewing the partnership for a unified approach to end hunger in Africa by 2025. Carol Oyola, CCTV.